In November 2025, a West African general did something that should terrify every Western diplomat watching the continent. General Horta Inanaman didn't just seize power in Guinea-Bissau. He ripped his country out of ECOWAS and handed the keys to a military alliance that's rewriting the rules of African geopolitics. This wasn't a coup. This was a calculated demolition of the post-colonial order. And what he did next gave three landlocked juntas something they've been desperately hunting for: direct access to the Atlantic Ocean. The dominoes are falling. The map is being redrawn. And if you think this is just about one small nation, you're already behind. General Horta Inanaman seized power in Guinea-Bissau through a military coup, and within weeks, he made a declaration that sent shockwaves across West Africa. Guinea-Bissau was leaving ECOWAS, not pausing membership, not threatening exit, leaving. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a calculated rupture with the regional order that has governed West African politics for nearly 5 decades. General Horta didn't mince words. He framed the withdrawal as a rejection of what he called Western-backed interference in Guinea-Bissau's internal affairs. According to the junta, ECOWAS has become a vehicle for foreign agendas, a multilateral facade that perpetuates exploitation rather than delivering the development and security it promises. For Horta, staying in ECOWAS meant staying dependent. Leaving meant sovereignty. And in a region where sovereignty is increasingly contested, that language carries weight. But this isn't just about rhetoric. Guinea-Bissau's exit reflects a deeper fracture in West African geopolitics. ECOWAS was built on the premise of collective security, economic integration, and regional stability. Yet in recent years, that premise has come under serious strain. Military coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have already challenged the bloc's authority. Sanctions imposed by ECOWAS on these juntas were met with defiance, not compliance. And now Guinea-Bissau has joined the chorus of states openly questioning whether the regional body serves African interests or Western ones. The timing is critical. Guinea-Bissau's withdrawal doesn't happen in isolation. It happens as the Sahel realigns. It happens as France's military presence contracts. It happens as Russia expands influence through private security and diplomatic engagement. Horta's decision to pull Guinea-Bissau out of ECOWAS is not just about domestic governance. It's about signaling which geopolitical camp his government intends to operate within. And that camp is increasingly non-Western. What makes this particularly significant is Guinea-Bissau's history. This is a country that has cycled through coups, assassinations, and political instability for decades. It's a narco-state in all but name, with drug trafficking routes from Latin America passing directly through its archipelago. Governance has been weak, institutions fragile. External actors, whether European powers, international organizations, or criminal networks, have long exerted more influence than any sitting president. So when General Horta claims ECOWAS has failed to deliver security or development, he's not wrong. The question is whether leaving the bloc makes Guinea-Bissau stronger or more vulnerable. ECOWAS now faces a legitimacy crisis. If member states can unilaterally withdraw after coups without facing meaningful consequences, what authority does the organization actually hold? The bloc has already struggled to enforce its own rules. Sanctions against Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger were eventually lifted or ignored. Diplomatic pressure failed to reverse any of the recent coups. And now Guinea-Bissau has formalized what others have implied. ECOWAS is optional. This is where the stakes become clear. If ECOWAS collapses, or even if it fragments into competing blocs, West Africa loses its primary mechanism for conflict resolution, trade coordination, and collective security. That vacuum won't stay empty. Other actors will fill it. Russia has already demonstrated interest. China continues to expand economic ties. And regional powers like Nigeria and Senegal will have to decide whether they double down on ECOWAS or hedge their bets elsewhere. For Guinea-Bissau, the immediate future is uncertain. Leaving ECOWAS means losing access to regional trade agreements, development funds, and diplomatic support. It means greater isolation or greater freedom, depending on who you ask. General Horta has framed this as a moment of national assertion, a rejection of neo-colonial structures. But assertion without capacity is just rhetoric. And Guinea-Bissau's capacity, militarily, economically, institutionally, is limited. What happens next could redefine the region. If Guinea-Bissau's exit emboldens other juntas to follow suit, ECOWAS may fracture beyond repair. If the withdrawal leads to instability or economic collapse, it could serve as a cautionary tale. Either way, this is no longer a question of whether West Africa's regional architecture will change. It's a question of how fast and who controls what comes after. General Horta Inanaman has made his move. The region is watching, and the consequences are just beginning to unfold. Guinea-Bissau just handed the Alliance of Sahel States something it desperately needed: access to the Atlantic Ocean. In December 2025, after formally withdrawing from ECOWAS, the West African nation announced its decision to join the AES, a bloc comprising Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. This isn't symbolic. This is strategic. For three landlocked military juntas trying to build an alternative regional order, Guinea-Bissau's coastline changes everything. The Alliance of Sahel States was formed in opposition to ECOWAS, born out of frustration with sanctions, Western pressure, and what these governments view as neo-colonial meddling. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have spent the past 2 years consolidating power, expelling French forces, and pivoting toward Russia. But they faced one critical limitation: geography. Landlocked nations depend on neighbors for trade routes, port access, and maritime security. Without coastal access, the AES was boxed in. Guinea-Bissau just opened the gate. This is where the stakes become clear. With Guinea-Bissau in the fold, the AES gains direct access to Atlantic shipping lanes. That means the potential to bypass ECOWAS-controlled ports in Senegal, Ghana, and Nigeria. It means leveraging Guinea-Bissau's territorial waters for military coordination and resource control. And it means the bloc can now position itself as a viable alternative to the regional order that has governed West Africa for decades. For a group of military governments trying to prove they can operate independently of Western-backed institutions, this is a legitimacy boost. But Guinea-Bissau's motivations are just as calculated. Joining the AES offers the country something ECOWAS never delivered: a regional framework that prioritizes sovereignty over integration. General Horta Inanaman and the ruling junta have made it clear they view ECOWAS as a mechanism of foreign control, dominated by Nigerian and Senegalese influence and aligned with Western interests. The AES, by contrast, markets itself as a coalition of self-determination, a bloc where military governments set their own terms, resist external pressure, and collectively secure their survival. For Guinea-Bissau, that narrative aligns perfectly with the post-coup political realignment. The geopolitical implications extend far beyond trade routes. Guinea-Bissau's integration into the AES strengthens the bloc's narrative that it offers a credible alternative to Western-dominated regional organizations. This isn't just about rejecting ECOWAS. It's about building a counterbloc with its own security architecture, economic planning, and diplomatic leverage. And with Russian influence growing across the Sahel through Wagner Group successors, arms deals, and political support, the AES is increasingly functioning as a sphere of non-Western alignment. Guinea-Bissau's membership expands that sphere to the coast. For West Africa, this represents a fundamental shift in regional power dynamics. ECOWAS was designed to integrate economies, mediate conflicts, and project collective influence. But the rise of the AES challenges that model. If military juntas can form their own bloc, attract new members, and operate outside ECOWAS's authority, the organization's relevance diminishes. And if the AES continues to expand, whether through formal membership or informal alignment, it could fracture West Africa into competing spheres of influence. That fracture has consequences for everything from counterterrorism coordination to trade agreements to migration policy. The question now is whether the AES can deliver on its promises. Military coordination sounds strategic, but Guinea-Bissau's armed forces are weak and fragmented. Enhanced trade routes require infrastructure that doesn't currently exist. And collective security means little if member states are struggling with internal insurgencies, governance failures, and economic collapse. The AES may offer an ideological alternative to ECOWAS, but ideology doesn't fund ports, train armies, or stabilize governments. Still, the symbolic weight of this alignment cannot be ignored. Guinea-Bissau's decision to join the AES signals that the post-colonial regional order in West Africa is unraveling. States are choosing sides, and those sides are increasingly defined not by economic integration or democratic governance, but by geopolitical orientation. Western-aligned versus non-Western, multilateral cooperation versus nationalist sovereignty. What happens next could redefine the region. If the AES consolidates into a functional bloc with real economic and military capacity, it becomes a legitimate challenger to ECOWAS. If it fragments under the weight of internal contradictions, Guinea-Bissau's gamble may prove costly. Either way, the Sahel is no longer landlocked, and that changes the map of West African power in ways that are only beginning to take shape. Guinea-Bissau is now officially modeling its future on Captain Ibrahim Traoré. The military junta led by General Horta Inanaman has declared that the country will pursue what it calls a second wave of African sovereignty, a deliberate break from international financial institutions, Western development models, and the economic frameworks that have governed post-colonial Africa for decades. This isn't rhetoric borrowed from liberation-era speeches. This is a live policy shift inspired directly by Burkina Faso's young military leader, and it signals that Guinea-Bissau intends to follow the Traoré playbook: state-led development, resource nationalism, and military governance as the engine of transformation. Captain Ibrahim Traoré rose to power in Burkina Faso through a coup in 2022, and since then, he's become the face of a new brand of African nationalism. His government has expelled French troops, suspended cooperation with the IMF, and championed self-reliance as a political doctrine. Traoré's message is simple. African nations must control their own resources, reject foreign debt traps, and build economies that serve African interests, not multinational corporations or Western creditors. For young Africans frustrated with decades of stagnant growth, corruption, and external exploitation, Traoré's model resonates. And now Guinea-Bissau wants in. General Horta has made it clear that his government will prioritize domestic infrastructure, local value addition, and reducing dependence on institutions like the IMF and World Bank. That means rejecting the structural adjustment programs and austerity measures that have defined African economic policy for generations. It means building roads, ports, and industries without waiting for donor approval. And it means keeping resource wealth inside the country rather than exporting raw materials for processing elsewhere. On paper, this sounds like economic sovereignty. In practice, it's a high-risk gamble that depends on capacity Guinea-Bissau may not have. This is where the stakes become clear. Guinea-Bissau is one of the poorest countries in the world. Its economy is fragile, heavily dependent on cashew exports, and compromised by drug trafficking. Governance has been weak for decades. Infrastructure is minimal. So when the junta announces it will pursue self-reliant development, the question isn't whether the goal is admirable. It's whether the state has the technical, financial, and institutional capacity to pull it off. Traoré's Burkina Faso has struggled with the same challenges, and the results so far are mixed. Economic growth has slowed. Security conditions have deteriorated. And while the rhetoric of sovereignty is popular, the reality of governance remains difficult. But the ideological appeal of this model cannot be dismissed. Across the Sahel and West Africa, military governments are framing themselves as the antidote to failed civilian leadership. They argue that democratic institutions have been captured by foreign interests, that elections produce leaders accountable to donors rather than citizens, and that only military discipline can impose the order necessary for rapid development. Guinea-Bissau is now part of that narrative. By aligning with Traoré's vision, the junta positions itself within a broader movement, one that claims to be reclaiming African control over political and economic destiny. The focus on military-led governance is particularly significant. In this model, the military isn't just a security force, It's a primary institution capable of driving state transformation. That includes protecting natural resources from foreign exploitation, enforcing economic policy, and maintaining political stability through centralized control. For regimes facing legitimacy deficits, this framing offers a path to justify prolonged military rule. Development becomes the mandate, sovereignty becomes the mission, and elections become secondary to progress. Yet the risks are substantial. State-led development requires functional institutions, skilled bureaucracies, and significant capital, none of which Guinea-Bissau possesses in abundance. Rejecting the IMF and World Bank means losing access to development finance, technical assistance, and international credibility. And without external support, building infrastructure and diversifying the economy becomes exponentially harder. Traore's Burkina Faso has leaned on Russian support to fill some of these gaps, but that support comes with its own dependencies and geopolitical strings. What happens next could define whether this second wave of sovereignty is transformative or performative. If Guinea-Bissau manages to translate Traore's rhetoric into tangible development, it strengthens the case for military-led nationalism across the continent. If the gamble fails, if the economy stagnates, if infrastructure projects collapse, if instability deepens, it becomes a cautionary tale about the limits of ideology without capacity. General Horta has chosen his model. The inspiration is clear. But inspiration alone doesn't build nations. And Guinea-Bissau's future now depends on whether sovereignty rhetoric can survive the hard realities of governance. Guinea-Bissau's exit from ECOWAS isn't just about one small nation leaving a regional bloc. It's about what that exit reveals. ECOWAS is losing control. For nearly 50 years, the Economic Community of West African States has been the primary framework for regional integration, conflict resolution, and collective security in West Africa. But in 2025, that framework is fracturing, and the Alliance of Sahel States is positioning itself as the alternative. Guinea-Bissau's decision to join the AES over ECOWAS isn't an isolated choice. It's a signal that the regional order is being rewritten in real time. ECOWAS was built on the premise that West African nations are stronger together. Shared borders, integrated markets, collective defense, democratic governance. These were the pillars. But those pillars have been crumbling. Military coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and now Guinea-Bissau have gone largely unchecked. Sanctions imposed by ECOWAS failed to reverse any of these takeovers. Diplomatic pressure was ignored, and the bloc's inability to enforce its own rules has exposed a fundamental problem. Without the capacity to compel compliance, ECOWAS is increasingly irrelevant to the governments that matter most. The rise of the AES is a direct response to that weakness. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger didn't just leave ECOWAS, they built something else. The Alliance of Sahel States was designed as a counterbloc, one that prioritizes resource sovereignty, domestic industrialization, and military-backed governance over the democratic norms and Western alignment that define ECOWAS. And critically, the AES offers something ECOWAS never convincingly delivered: the promise of strategic independence. For nations tired of structural adjustment programs, donor conditionalities, and external interference, that promise is compelling. Guinea-Bissau's decision to align with the AES rather than remain in ECOWAS is a vote of no confidence in the latter. It suggests that the junta in Bissau believes the future of West African power lies not with the established regional order, but with a new bloc that rejects Western oversight and champions military-led development. And if Guinea-Bissau believes that, others might too. This is where the stakes become clear. If ECOWAS continues to hemorrhage members, or if more nations begin hedging their bets by maintaining dual affiliations, the bloc's legitimacy erodes further. And once legitimacy is gone, institutional collapse follows. The geopolitical implications are profound. West Africa is now divided between competing visions of regionalism. On one side, ECOWAS, still dominated by Nigeria and backed by Western partners, represents the traditional multilateral framework. On the other, the AES, increasingly aligned with Russian influence and supported by a growing narrative of African sovereignty, represents an alternative path. These aren't just ideological differences. They're divergent models of governance, security, and economic development. And they're pulling the region in opposite directions. For countries dissatisfied with ECOWAS, Guinea-Bissau's move sets a precedent. If a small, politically unstable nation can leave the bloc and join the AES without facing crippling consequences, what stops others from doing the same? Senegal, Ghana, and Côte d'Ivoire remain committed to ECOWAS, but even within these countries, there are factions questioning whether the bloc serves their interests. And in countries where military influence is growing, like Chad, Guinea-Conakry, or even parts of Nigeria, the AES model may start to look attractive. The power dynamics are shifting in ways that weren't imaginable 5 years ago. ECOWAS used to mediate West African conflicts. Now it struggles to maintain its own membership. It used to project collective strength. Now it's outflanked by a military alliance that operates outside its rules. And perhaps most significantly, ECOWAS used to define what regional integration meant in West Africa. Now that definition is being contested by a bloc that prioritizes sovereignty over cooperation, nationalism over multilateralism, and military governance over democratic transitions. What happens next could redefine the region. If the AES consolidates and expands, ECOWAS may find itself sidelined, an institution that still exists on paper but lacks the influence to shape outcomes. If ECOWAS can reassert its relevance by delivering tangible benefits to member states, it may stabilize. But that requires capacity, resources, and political will that the bloc has struggled to muster in recent years. Guinea-Bissau has made its choice. The question now is whether that choice becomes a trend. And if it does, West Africa may soon be operating under two competing regional orders, neither fully in control, both vying for influence. The map is being redrawn, and the consequences will shape the next decade of African geopolitics.